Hi, this is Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul's Missionary Baptist Church in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. Today, I want to talk about reconciliation and balance. Reconciliation and balance. It's important for us to understand that in order for us to reconcile, there has to be a balance, right? So reconciliation is when you bring two or more parties together, you resolve any issues, anything that causes division, and in a way that you can move together in a positive manner. That's a generic definition of reconciliation. But I think it's so important for us to understand that reconciliation is a two-sided coin, right? There has to be balance, because when you don't have balance in reconciliation, then you usually get things don't move forward, or there's a false unity. And one of the things we have to realize is that there are people that want a false unity. And what I mean by false unity is a unity that's not based on truth. It's not based on positive or good foundational things that could help things move together long term. So sometimes we reconcile, but we reconcile in a way that's only a temporary fix. It's like putting a Band-Aid over something. I use the example that if you broke your arm and your arm is bleeding out, you can't just cover up the blood. You got to reset the bone. You got to have a good foundation. And I see a lot of factions out there that are trying to establish a false unity. A false unity is something that may last temporarily, but there's no long-term chance for success with it. So let's look at reconciliation as a way of a two-sided coin, right? So we have to acknowledge that between in America, with black and white race relations, there have been historical, legal, cultural things that have plagued the black community, both past, present, and present, both past and present. So we all know, and I don't have to reiterate it, but just for the sake of the video, slavery, Jim Crow, the criminal justice system that acknowledged that there were disparities among sentencing of African American males. Also, there were racial profiling where black males were targeted. These things are historic, right? They have happened. And currently, there's a lot of people that are still affected by that. I know that from personal experience. There's people that are currently affected by the disparities in the criminal justice system, right? Among other things, these are not things that aren't well known or documented. Right. So when we talk about reconciliation, those things have to be addressed. Those things have to be talked about. Right. You have to have open and honest conversations about those type of things. The other part of that is in reconciliation. We also have to acknowledge the things that the African American community has to do as well, right? There's personal responsibility that we have to take, because aside from violence and mistreatment by people outside of a community, more specifically law enforcement, we also have to address the black on black crime issue. And a lot of people say, oh, you can't throw those two together, but you have to realize just from a realistic psychological understanding that if you don't value yourself or the things of yourself more than other people, then they have a tendency not to value you at all, or hold you in high regard. Psychologically, they did an experiment, and it showed that, like, for instance, and this is kind of a generic example of what I'm talking about, but they took two cars. In one car, they washed it and waxed it, and everything was immaculate. And they parked it in a crowded parking lot. And then they took another car that wasn't. It had dings in it. It was dirty. It was a lot of trash inside the car and everything. And they parked that car in a crowded parking lot. What they found was that people were less likely to bump into or they were more careful around the car that was immaculate, because psychologically what that message was that if you really value that car that much, then other people held a certain value to that car. And inversely, the car that was real junky and had dings already in it, had dents in it, and all kind of trash and stuff inside of it, people were less careful around that car, because, again, going to our example, that when you don't value something, other people have a tendency not to value something more than you will value. And I say all that to say that, in our community, we have to demonstrate a value for for personal life. And if we don't, then we can't expect other people outside of our community to have a higher value for Black lives than we do. And I'm going to do another video because we got to be careful when we grab a hold of movements, right? The Black Lives Matter phrase is something that most people agree on, but you have to look at the actual belief system underlying of the creation of Black Lives Matter. But that's a different video. And also, as I go forward, if you will be so kind as to subscribe to the channel and also share the videos. I think that there's a lot of great content and a lot of information. Now, we don't go at things from an emotional standpoint. We try to go through things logically and factually, right, using historical, biblical references and all those type of things. So it doesn't quite, it's not as popular because most people kind of gravitate towards the emotional appeal of certain videos and certain people. Even if they don't agree with them, the emotion is what draws people in from time to time. Another fact I want to state is that because of the great diversity of the ethnicities in this country, the United States is one of the most ethnically diverse countries in the world. And because of that, you probably have a higher percentage of interaction between various ethnicities and cultures than other places. And so because of that, naturally, there's a higher opportunity or higher percentage of negative interactions between cultures and nations. So this whole idea that America is just full of bigots and it's racist and everything usually is probably inflated or exaggerated because of the high percentage of various ethnicities that are kind of cohabitating, in this country. And that it adheres to that. But really, what in this reconciliation piece, like I said, both sides, we have to address the inequalities. We have to address the mistreatment in certain systems and how the Black community is perceived through the media and through other things of that nature. But really, what you see is a breakdown of a community. That's the biggest problem in the in the Black urban areas. A breakdown of community. And what do I mean by that? When you have a broken community, and I'm going to go through the various aspects of what makes a community. When you have a broken community, then you have more opportunities for negative police interactions. So, for instance, a community is made up primarily of families, right? So when you talk about ethnicities or cultures, it's the family unit is the backbone for any community. And the backbone of the family, traditionally, especially in the African-American community, was the church, right? So the church gives the moral foundation for families and how we raise families and how we view families. And also the church was a type of community center historically where, you go to church on Sundays, you worship, you get spiritual instruction, your children go there. In our churches, we used to have Vacation Bible School. A lot of churches have schools whenever there's needs in the community. So we have a homeless ministry, we have a food bank and a clothing bank. Some of them have daycares in them. So, and even during the civil rights movement, it was the church that was the foundation. It was the meeting place. It was the place that they all strategized together to go out and to change the community. So the church is the foundation of the community, or should be. The family is the foundation, but the church is the foundation for the family. So when you have strong community, you don't have the need to be policed by people outside of your community. See, when I was growing up, we had a pretty strong community and we had a strong family unit for the most part where I grew up at. And so I couldn't have stood on the corner and did all kind of lawless things because many men, my friends' fathers, mentors, coaches, all those people would come and they would have corrected me. If I went to school, I had a certain level of respect I had to show in school, because if the report came home that I was being disrespectful or acting up in school, I would have gotten corrected. And not only would I have gotten corrected, but I would have gotten corrected by other people, by the teacher, by someone else's parent, by the old lady who lives down the street who saw me acting out, right? And so that's what happens when you have a strong community. Even think about this for a second. One of the biggest statistic of the COVID deaths were people that were in nursing homes. When you have stronger communities, a lot of times you have less need for nursing homes. For instance, in the Asian communities traditionally, and I live near some of them, a lot of them have moved recently into our neighborhood, and there's probably 3 or 4 generations of people there, the elderly people. The one family, their 100-year-old grandfather lives in the house with them. So in broken communities or weaker family units, they would have lived in a nursing home, but because of that, they're at home with their family, right? So when you have stronger communities, you have less dependency on other social services and organizations. When you have stronger communities, there's so many other things that fall into place when you have a strong community. Now, of course, we know slavery, Jim Crow, racism, and all those other things that happened. There was targeting on the black community, but those things have been legally dealt with. What I mean is, those laws are no longer in existence, and other things. But so in that vein, let me talk very briefly about this whole notion of white supremacy. And people will talk about white supremacy as though it's a foregone conclusion. Let me give you some statistics, because facts are facts, right? Facts don't care about your feelings or your perception. Your perception and your feelings should change around facts as opposed to the other way around. So in America right now, the community with the highest household income is Africans, Nigerians, from primarily Nigerians and West Africans. Africans have the highest household income in America right now in 2020. Number 2 are Asians, right? Number 3 are European Jews, and number 4 are white European families. I'm sorry. So let me say that again. So the top 4 household incomes are Africans, Asians, European Jews, and then European whites. So this whole idea of white supremacy is debunked by that fact, because of the fact that, now this is a recent occurrence, of course, obviously, but when you look at all those communities I named, they have the strongest family unit and the strongest community. They have the strongest family unit and the strongest community, and because of that, they have a higher household income, they have a higher educational performance, and you have all these other factors that come into play based on whether you have a strong or weak community and weak family unit. Now, let me take it a step further. You have lower educational outcomes when you have weaker families, because, like in many of the inner city schools that I've worked with and dealt with, the teachers have such a hard time trying to deal with behaviors, deal with family issues, deal with all those things, that they can't focus as much on the education piece. And not only that, but there's more negative interactions in schools that have weaker families because of the fact that the teachers have to use more corrective measures. The school district that in Harrisburg, they've had traditionally over the last few years, they had a couple of years ago, they had a huge riot of people of all different people fighting. Right. You have a lot of disciplinary problems. There was an article in the paper a couple of years ago that they had a huge amount of teachers that quit because some of them were getting threatened by the students for physical harm. And I'm not talking about just high school. I'm talking about middle school and even elementary school. And so these are all side effects when you have a weak community and a weak family unit. You also have, as I mentioned earlier, a higher probability or a higher percentage of interaction with police. You have a higher percentage of interaction with police just by nature of having a weaker community. Again, I used the example when I was a young person, when I was a young man, that the community helped to police me, right? And what backed up that strong community was my family unit, right? Now, my family unit reinforced the community's policing of me. I'm going to say that again. My strong family unit reinforced the policing of me. Now, why do I keep stressing that? Because this day and time, and many of you may have experienced this, I've seen it firsthand to a large scale. When you have a weaker family unit, the community has less influence on policing the young person. So back in the days, going back to my childhood and generations past, if I would have acted up in school, note comes home to school from school, I'm in big trouble. So I didn't care as much about getting in trouble with the teacher, but the ramifications of what would happen at home. in the community. When Mr. Jones or Mr. Smith from down the street corrected me, I would take the correction, right? Because I didn't want it going home. Oh, you were showing off. Mr. Smith had to correct you, or whatever the case may be. And the reason that that's important is because nowadays, and I've seen it firsthand on many, many instances, when a child from a weak family unit gets in trouble, the temptation is that the single mom or whoever is the grandmom goes and defends the child. And so they go and they're aggressive towards the teacher, right? Or even the neighbors. If, when I was coming up, if someone corrected me and I knew I was wrong, I didn't want my parents to know about it. I didn't want my family to know about it. But nowadays, and I've seen this firsthand, the child will say, "You're not my mother. You don't, you can't tell me what to do." And then they'll go home and tell their parent, and the parent comes and engages in that authority figure, that parent, that adult, in a negative way. These are all signs of weakened communities and weakened family units. And so one of the greatest tools for us to restore our community and to look for reconciliation is to build our communities up and have stronger family units and begin to have the conversations in ways that we can heal. We're in a very, very dangerous place. And I think it's so important for us to take advantage of these things and not have these knee-jerk reactions. Things like defunding the police is absurd. It's ridiculous. Just looking for somebody else outside of our community to completely fix our problems. And you'll see the rhetoric. So whenever you bring up black on black crime, what do people say? Oh, now you're blaming the victim, or that's not the issue, or why do you bring that up every time? Because the overwhelmingly larger percentage of African Americans, especially African American males, their lives are ended from black on black crime to a much, much, much larger, like a probably 8 or 9 to 1 ratio or more than by white police officers. So even though that's an issue that has to be addressed, that's not the most serious issue that's plaguing the black community. Again, I believe it's weak families, weak communities, and a lack of communities and families give you your identity. So because of that, you have a lack of personal identity, which leads to many various negative manifestations in our lives. So this has been Joe Green, and peace and blessings to you. Until next time, have a great weekend and a great day. Shalom, shalom.